I was forced into a marriage I never wanted. And somehow, after all that chaos, I ended up in a car accident and lost my memory. When my husband came to see me at the hospital, he didn't exactly look relieved. His tone was ice cold and impatient. He immediately accused me of pulling another desperate stunt just to force him into doing what I wanted. Instead of arguing, I simply apologized. Then I casually dropped the one thing he least expected. I wanted a divorce. He actually froze for a moment. Then he clenched his jaw and repeated that I wanted a divorce. His expression practically screamed, "Are you trying to drive me to my grave?" When he showed up at the hospital again, I was already awake and sitting in bed. He glanced at me, lying there, then immediately looked away as if eye contact itself annoyed him. He walked over and casually dropped himself onto the sofa beside the bed. Then he warned me not to use a stunt like this again. According to him, the consequences weren't worth it. But before he even arrived, my friend had already explained part of our situation. Apparently, my relationship with this man had been a complete disaster. I took a deep breath, then finally decided to tell him the truth. I told him that I had lost my memory. For the first time, his expression flickered with surprise, but that surprise quickly turned into a mocking smile. He clearly thought I was playing another mind game to manipulate him. He basically acted like I'd watched too many cheesy romance dramas. Did I seriously think he was stupid enough to believe me? Honestly, I couldn't even blame him for doubting me. From what I'd heard, our relationship over the past few years had been nothing but constant warfare. We were practically enemies under the same roof. If I were in his position, I'd probably assume I was being played too. I forced an awkward smile, then decided I wasn't wasting energy arguing with him. Luckily, the doctor standing nearby had already had enough of this nonsense. He stepped in and explained my condition to my husband in painfully clear terms. The more my husband listened, the darker his expression became. When the explanation was over, he slowly turned back toward me. He asked how much I'd forgotten. Our eyes met. For some reason, I suddenly felt a little guilty. Then, I quietly admitted that I'd forgotten the most ridiculous fact of all. I didn't remember that we were already married. My husband stared at me. He studied my face for several long seconds. Then he actually laughed. He asked if I had also forgotten how I had forced my way into his life, manipulated the situation, and pressured him into marrying me. Had I conveniently forgotten all the schemes I'd used over the past 2 years just to make him fall in love with me? He looked at me like I had pulled off the most unbelievable scam imaginable. And judging by his face, he was absolutely furious. My friend had only warned me that our relationship was terrible. But apparently, there was a lot more to the story. Somehow, 2 years later, I had apparently become the kind of person who was forcing love like some unhinged romance villain. I quietly looked at my husband. He had sharp features and an intense presence. His face carried the kind of natural aggression that could intimidate anyone. So, I could almost understand why the future version of me had gone completely feral. Unfortunately, the woman standing here now wasn't the same woman I'd supposedly become 2 years later. I still had at least a shred of morality left in me. I stayed silent for a long moment, waiting until my husband's anger finally settled down. Then I carefully apologized and admitted that I was sorry. I told him I'd already heard about what had happened between us. He let out a bitter laugh. What exactly had I heard? The part where I'd manipulated and toyed with him? He might have had a handsome face, but his mouth was absolutely savage. One sentence from him was enough to leave me speechless. Still, I continued and told him I agreed to the divorce. After we separated, I would compensate him as much as possible. If he wanted cash, I'd pay him. If he wanted company shares, I'd give him those instead. I honestly expected him to feel relieved. After all, wasn't divorce exactly what he'd wanted? Apparently, I had completely misread the situation, because he became even angrier. He froze. His face turned absolutely terrible. He stared at me as if I'd just said something completely insane. Then he gritted his teeth and repeated the word divorce. Was I seriously trying to destroy him? How could I be the one who decided we were getting married? And then casually decide we were getting divorced? He warned me right there. I was never going to escape him for the rest of my life. Even if I fell for someone else, that wouldn't change a thing. He wasn't about to leave any room for another man. He kept pressing me, sentence after sentence, refusing to back down. But toward the end, his eyes began turning red. That completely threw me off. I had no idea how to handle this situation, so I quickly took back what I'd said. I told him I was only joking about the divorce. If he didn't want to leave, then fine. He immediately turned his face away, pretending not to care. But the way he stubbornly denied wanting me to leave said everything. I could only let out a helpless sigh. Then I started trying to calm him down. I gave in completely. Fine. I don't want a divorce either. I finally admitted the truth. I was the one who couldn't let go of him. I was terrified that once my memories returned, I'd regret leaving him and end up begging him to marry me all over again. He shot me a fierce glare, pretending to be completely offended. But deep down, he knew I wasn't wrong. Seriously, comforting an angry husband was exhausting. Somehow, it felt even more draining than surviving a car accident. On the way home, my husband didn't say a single word to me. Meanwhile, I kept interrogating my friend for every detail I could get. Piece by piece, I finally reconstructed the entire disaster. The short version? I had fallen for him at first sight. Naturally, I went all in and started chasing him. The problem was, he rejected me. Then, just when his family went bankrupt, I refused to accept reality. I cut off every escape route his family had. Then I used their desperate situation to force him into marrying me. And that was how our 2-year marriage began. Unsurprisingly, he never exactly treated me like a loving wife. Looking back, I couldn't believe I'd been stupid enough to lose my mind like that. I'd actually copied those toxic forced romance tropes. And somehow, things got even worse. Because now, whenever I looked at my husband, some dangerous part of me still wanted to repeat the whole forced love routine. I mean, look at him! I immediately slapped those questionable thoughts out of my head. I decided right then and there that I was going to turn my life around. Ever since the confrontation at the hospital, my husband had basically started treating me like invisible furniture. Then reality hit me. I was supposed to sleep in the same bed with him tonight. And shamefully, my heart started racing. But the moment I looked at his cold expression, my heart immediately went into airplane mode. Whatever. A relationship forced into existence wasn't going to end well anyway. So I gathered my things and prepared to leave the bedroom. That's when I ran straight into my husband, who had just finished showering. And unfortunately, for my remaining self-control, he looked ridiculously good. Water droplets slid down his neck, disappearing beneath the edge of his bathrobe. Damn it. Apparently, my future self had been eating extremely well. I swallowed hard. Then I quickly turned my head away. I told him I knew he didn't want to sleep with me. So I'd take the guest room. I turned around and immediately made my escape, except someone blocked my path. My husband stood directly in front of me. Warm steam still lingered around him from the shower. He calmly reminded me of one very important rule. I wasn't allowed to sleep in the guest room. Apparently, that was one of the house rules I'd created myself. He looked at me with a complicated expression. I straightened up, then finally remembered what he meant. Still, I refused to lose face and immediately tried to argue my way out. I told him that since I had created the rule, he had to follow it. Then I accused him of being all talk and secretly wanting me around. His expression didn't change even slightly. Instead, he stepped closer and kept pressing me. There was even a hint of bitter self-mockery in his voice. Because apparently, the spoiled heiress who controlled everything had once declared that if he slept in the guest room, she would pull all her family's investment out of his family's business. Well, that was brutal. 2 years older me had apparently collected quite the arsenal of toxic tactics. I became so embarrassed that I couldn't even look him in the eyes. I awkwardly explained that the rule was specifically about him. Surely I could sleep in the guest room without causing any trouble. I was just about to make another escape attempt when my husband suddenly grabbed me and pulled me straight onto the bed. He admitted that he didn't want me recovering my memories only to start using our past against him again. Then he dropped that bombshell, turned his back to me, and simply lay down. I hesitated for a few seconds, but eventually stayed in bed beside him. After everything that had happened that day, I was completely drained, physically and emotionally. I fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, I woke up wrapped in my husband's arms. Not gonna lie, all those years of dreaming about having a beautiful wife, or in my case, a beautiful husband, had finally paid off. The journey had definitely been messy, but the result was surprisingly satisfying. I was just about to snuggle a little deeper into his arms when my husband's voice suddenly came from above my head. Apparently, losing my memory hadn't stopped me from taking advantage of him. And yeah, I had just been caught red-handed. I instantly scrambled out of his arms, embarrassed beyond belief. He noticed my reaction, but didn't say anything. He simply got out of bed on his own. I watched him walk away. Then I silently cursed him in my head. The irony was, apparently, the old me used to insult him straight to his face. And now, I barely had the courage to mutter anything. After he somehow saw right through me again, I became so embarrassed that my frustration finally exploded. I accused him of being completely ungrateful. Yet my husband didn't get angry at all. He turned around with a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He reminded me that I used to insult him exactly the same way. And honestly, the facts spoke for themselves. Sometimes, judging someone by their face alone is a terrible idea. I apparently fell for my husband's ridiculously handsome face, only to bring home a walking disaster disguised as a husband. Later, while sitting at the dining table, I suddenly remembered something important. I looked across the table at my silent husband. After hesitating for a moment, I finally asked, "Where was our marriage certificate?" I wanted to see it for myself. The spoon in his hand suddenly stopped. Yet his expression remained completely calm. He casually told me it had been destroyed. Then he looked up at me as if the answer were obvious. His voice remained cold and emotionless. Why would he keep it around? Only to remind himself every time he saw it that I'd forced him into marriage? I had absolutely nothing to say to that. So I lowered my head and quietly finished my meal. The second I was done, I couldn't wait to call my friend and complain. I told him the whole situation was weird because my husband usually couldn't stand me. Yet for once, he wasn't simply going along with whatever I wanted. My friend basically told me to just make the best of it. After all, what else could we do? Then he pointed out that we were basically a pair of enemies trapped in marriage. And somehow, both of us seemed to be enjoying the chaos. I admitted that I was actually thirsty. My friend immediately misunderstood me and asked if I meant thirsty for food. I was so speechless that I replied with nothing but 6 periods. I was just about to start a video call and complain properly, when a loud commotion suddenly erupted downstairs. Curious, I headed downstairs. A blonde woman was standing there, chatting with my husband with an annoyingly cheerful smile. And my husband? He still wore that same permanently irritated expression. For a second, I wondered if he simply disliked me specifically. But maybe his facial muscles were just naturally defective, because that man apparently had only one expression. The blonde woman looked strangely familiar. She gave me a quick, casual greeting. Brother-in-law, she'd heard about my accident and apparently knew I was considering divorcing my husband. And according to her, the timing couldn't have been better, because conveniently, she happened to be a divorce lawyer. I didn't even need to find her. She had literally delivered herself to my doorstep. At that point, I understood everything. Apparently, the legal job market was so brutal that lawyers had started personally hunting down customers. I walked over with genuine interest. The blonde lawyer immediately introduced herself. She was basically the complete opposite of my cold-blooded husband. She was funny, energetic, and ridiculously entertaining, and once she started talking, she absolutely wouldn't stop. I listened to her sales pitch for nearly 20 minutes. By the end, I was genuinely tempted to purchase her deluxe divorce package. She proudly announced that her law firm was running a special promotion. Divorce services were 20% off that month. And because we were acquaintances, she offered me an absurd 50% discount. 50% off? Even I had to admit that was tempting. Then I remembered our marriage certificate had supposedly been torn up. So I asked whether we needed to replace it before getting divorced. The lawyer stared at me, clearly confused. Then she glanced at my husband and reminded me that the certificate wasn't actually destroyed. My husband had supposedly placed it inside a safe, and the password was our wedding anniversary. Apparently, my husband claimed I'd forced him to store it there. What? For some reason, I suddenly felt like someone had dumped an entire blame bucket over my head, and I wasn't even sure why. I turned toward my husband in disbelief. For the briefest moment, I caught a flash of panic in his eyes, but he instantly recovered. Then, with the most innocent expression imaginable, he claimed that I had ordered him to put it away. He said I'd told him to store it, but according to him, he didn't listen and simply tore it up. The lawyer stared at him with complete confusion. Then the corners of her mouth slowly curled into a suspicious smile. She clearly knew something was off. She looked directly at my husband, and there was an unmistakable warning in her eyes. She fought back a laugh, then turned back toward me and answered my question. If the marriage certificate really had been destroyed, we could simply apply for a replacement before proceeding with the divorce. I instinctively nodded. My husband immediately looked annoyed. He couldn't believe I was actually considering it. Then he looked straight at me. He reminded me how many times I'd mentioned divorce since waking up. Then he sarcastically asked what had changed. Back when I desperately wanted him to marry me, I'd done everything possible to make it happen. And now, barely 2 years later, I'd apparently changed my mind faster than he could process. At this point, he wasn't just annoyed. I chose this woman myself, so when things go sideways, I can only swallow the pain. When you've already made your choice, you just have to grit your teeth and live with it. I brushed him off casually. Don't be upset. I was only asking. I never said I was actually planning to divorce her. But the ice-cold wife immediately raised her voice, obviously trying way too hard to cover up her feelings. She turned her face away, and I caught the faintest blush on her cheeks. Meanwhile, lawyer friend was standing there enjoying the show. Apparently, he thought the drama still needed one more plot twist. So, naturally, he threw another log onto the fire. Look at you two. You're arguing every single day. Keep fighting like this, and sooner or later, you'll split anyway. Why not just get divorced right now? I'll even give you a 70% discount. I guarantee neither of you will feel like you got ripped off. He didn't even get to finish. The ice-cold wife grabbed an orange and launched it straight at him. You'd better stop, or I'll break your legs right here. That threat was crystal clear. My lawyer friend spent a few seconds weighing his career against his life. In the end, common sense won, and he immediately got out of there. After he finally left, my wife seemed to have cooled down. But then she started hovering around me nonstop, occasionally making all kinds of unnecessary noises just to get my attention. I honestly couldn't figure out what the hell she was doing, so I had to ask my friend, Fang Yuan. He replied with nothing but a sweating smile emoji. Then he sent me a post. The title asked, "Why does the cat keep staring at you after you bring it home?" The comments underneath were absolutely all over the place. Go home, kid. Just go home. Stop flirting with a blind man. Looks can be deceiving. I stared at the comments for ages, completely baffled. So I finally asked, then why the hell does she keep staring at me? Fang Yuan finally couldn't take it anymore. He sent me a 10-second voice message. Bro, you seriously need to stop reading so many romance novels. You've got plenty of theoretical knowledge. But what's the point if you never put any of it into practice? You're already feeling vulnerable right now. So just pin her down and make your move. Then when you recover your memories later, if she tries to run, just forget you heard that. The moment I realized what he was suggesting, it was already too late. My wife was staring at me with a deeply meaningful look. Her cheeks had turned suspiciously red, and there was even a faint hint of anticipation in her eyes. Almost as if she was waiting to see whether I'd actually dare to act on the ridiculous idea I'd just heard. At that moment, I seriously wondered if the car accident had left me with permanent brain damage. My wife picked up the glass in her hand, took a slow sip, and casually remarked, 2 years. I've been pretending for 2 whole years. Then she slowly walked toward me. I instinctively backed away. But eventually, I had nowhere left to go and my back hit the wall. She stopped directly in front of me. She lowered her head and looked straight down at me. Her lips curled into a dangerous little smile. Go ahead. If you've got the guts, try locking me up. At that point, I seriously thought I needed to get my brain checked. She was obviously threatening me. Yet somehow, every instinct I had told me she was actually hinting at something else. It almost sounded like she wanted me to do exactly that. And after threatening me, her mood somehow became noticeably better. I racked my brain, but I still couldn't understand what the hell she meant. So once again, I went back to Feng Yuan for answers. He stayed silent for more than 10 seconds. Then he hit me with the most completely unrelated question imaginable. Have you ever dated a British ghost? If you have, congratulations! You've already unlocked the next stage of your life. You're welcome. At that point, I didn't even care whether my wife was human or some kind of ghost. What I really wanted to know was something else. Had she actually kept our marriage certificate? Because honestly, sometimes I couldn't tell whether I was the one forcing her to stay home or whether she secretly preferred staying here with me. For several days, I never found a chance to track down a lawyer friend and ask him about the safe. Meanwhile, my wife's gaze slowly changed from hopeful to increasingly confused. The look in her eyes practically screamed. Why haven't you made your move yet? I was the one who had survived the car accident. So how was it starting to feel like she was the one with the broken brain? After the 101st hint went completely over my head, she finally gave up trying to get through to me. For once, she decided to step outside. That night, they invited me out for drinks. Before I could even answer, she started rambling, trying to explain herself. Of course, if you don't want me to go, that's fine. Just don't use your investment money to keep me trapped here. If you really don't want me leaving, I guess I can stay. The moment I realized she was actually going to cancel, I immediately stopped her. Of course you should go. I'd waited for days just to see her finally leave that house, even with my permission. She somehow looked even more annoyed. She grabbed a set of car keys and stormed out. The second I confirmed she was gone, I launched a full-scale search of the house. I checked practically everything. Nothing. Not a single clue. Eventually, only the wine cellar remained. I walked in without expecting anything. Then, tucked away in a corner, I discovered something that looked exactly like a safe. I entered our wedding anniversary. The safe clicked open. Inside were 2 marriage certificates. Both were carefully protected inside their own covers. My heartbeat suddenly thundered. In that tiny cellar, I could practically hear every beat. Everything I'd been wondering about, every suspicion, every wild guess I'd made finally fell into place. That day of the accident, I'd been planning to confront her and finally settle everything. But before I could even make it home, the accident happened. I blacked out. And just as I was coming back to consciousness, I heard someone crying. Then a single tear landed on the back of my hand. I forced my eyes open just enough to see. She was gripping my hand with both of hers. Her eyes were bloodshot from crying. For the first time, that cold expression was completely gone. She looked terrified. Fear, worry, and unmistakable concern were written all over her face. And in that moment, something finally clicked in my head. She might actually have feelings for me. I'd never been good at understanding relationships. I had confessed to her simply because I was attracted to her. Then I heard someone else was trying to win her over with money. So I decided to strike first. I forced the situation into marriage. But after that, I had no idea what I was supposed to do with her. I'd always believed she hated me. Maybe even despised me. But now, I wasn't so sure. As I slipped toward unconsciousness after the accident, memories flashed through my mind. Whenever I was sick, she was always there. In every photograph, her eyes seemed to find me without thinking. And then there were all those tiny moments from the past 2 years. She must have liked me. I originally planned to wait until I was fully recovered and talk things out. But then I realized something hilarious about my wife. She acted like two completely different people depending on who was watching. She'd already been secretly coming to see me. Yet the moment I noticed, she pretended she'd just arrived. So she liked playing games? Fine, I'd play along and make the game a lot bigger. I'd keep pushing her until she had nowhere left to hide her feelings. Until this emotionally constipated woman finally said what she really felt. So I took the marriage certificates out of the safe and quietly moved them somewhere else. I had barely put everything back when my friend suddenly sent me a location. Bro, watching you two move this slowly is painful. So I'm stepping in to speed things up. When you get there, don't come inside yet. Give me a heads up first. I was honestly curious what kind of stunt my friend had prepared. When I arrived, I stood outside the door and sent her a message. She didn't answer. But almost immediately, I heard her voice from inside. And she was speaking loudly enough for practically everyone to hear. So tell me already, do you actually like me? No more games. Just answer me. Well, there went the subtle approach. The method was painfully direct. But I couldn't help feeling nervous. There was a long silence from my wife. Then she let out a cold laugh. Like you? How could I possibly? I hate you. My heart dropped like I'd just been hit by a truck. As if she'd already predicted his answer, she delivered her next line with a smug little twist. The sarcasm in her voice was so thick it could have cut glass. She mocked her sister for spending 2 whole years pretending to hate him, while clearly fooling nobody. Every single day, she kept claiming she hated him. But deep down, she'd already fallen for him, and that realization was eating her alive. That had to hurt. Then came the question that hit straight at her weakness. What did she really hate? Maybe she wasn't angry that he ignored her. Maybe she hated that he never loved her enough. The other sisters immediately piled on, turning the conversation into a full-on roast session. One of them bluntly admitted she couldn't figure it out either. He didn't seem particularly obsessed with her. They'd never even seen her appear on his social media. So naturally, they started wondering if he'd simply gotten tired of her. And honestly, to them, that sounded completely normal. Those words were brutal enough to finally crack her emotional armor. She completely lost it. She snapped and accused everyone of talking nonsense. There was no way he didn't love her. After all, she insisted that I had practically forced her into my life. I was the one who had pushed for the marriage. So, in her mind, I could never stop loving her. She remembered how, back when I first pursued her, I had asked why she liked me. Her answer had been brutally simple. She liked my face. Later, when she was the one demanding marriage, she had another chance to explain herself. And once again, I asked her why. She simply said she couldn't accept losing me. From the very beginning until now, I finally remembered something I'd been overlooking all this time. There was one crucial piece of the puzzle I had completely missed. I had never once clearly told her that I loved her. That realization hit me hard, and I pushed open the door. She'd already gone through more drinks than I could count. But I knew her tolerance was ridiculous. So when he looked at me, I wasn't surprised to see his eyes still clear. There was no drunken haze at all. He clearly hadn't expected me to show up. He tried hard to hide the tiny spark of excitement flickering in his eyes, like he was determined not to let me see how happy he was. I decided to break the silence myself. I told him I was worried about him. So I had asked Li Xia for the address and came straight here. He leaned against the wall, secretly trying not to smile, while pretending he couldn't care less. Then he acted mildly annoyed and brushed it off. There was nothing for me to worry about. He promised he'd go home eventually. So there was no reason for me to rush over like this. I could hear the smug little brag hiding underneath every word. Apparently, my appearance had caused quite a stir. The others immediately became curious about the mysterious person he'd been talking about. The moment I sat down, the room turned into an interrogation chamber. His sister started firing questions at me from every direction. Nobody was even pretending to be subtle anymore. They called me brother-in-law. Then, they asked whether it was true that I had been the one to chase after him. I nodded, and the corner of his mouth immediately curled upward. The next question was whether I'd really been the one demanding that we get married. I nodded again. His smile only grew wider. Then they hit me with another bombshell. Was I really the one forcing him to be home before 10 every night? And did he really have to report to me whenever he went out? I stared at him in disbelief. When had I ever forced him to do any of that? Seriously? Just how much garbage had this guy been spreading about me behind my back? I shot him a warning glare. He immediately looked away, suddenly very interested in anything except my eyes. Meanwhile, everyone else sat there waiting for my answer like it was the final round of a boss fight. I took a deep breath. Then I admitted the truth. Yes, I was the one who made him follow those rules. And honestly, if I could have my way, I'd keep him at home for the rest of his life. The entire room collectively sucked in a breath. But he reacted completely differently from everyone else. The others looked absolutely stunned. He, on the other hand, looked like he was having the time of his life. And of course, I could tell someone nearby had already figured out exactly what was going on and was barely holding back a laugh. Then he checked the time. He grabbed his coat from the side. Standing beside me, he gave me a very obvious signal that it was time to leave. I'd barely even sat down. I suggested we stay a little longer. He immediately let out a cold snort. He wasn't about to let me set another trap for him. There were only 20 minutes left before 10. And the drive home would take 18 of them. He had no idea what I'd do to him once we got home. Apparently, according to him, I was capable of anything. I was so frustrated, I nearly laughed. So this whole time, the rumors floating around about him were all being manufactured and spread by him. He kept giving me that look, silently urging me to get moving. So I had no choice but to stand up and say goodbye to everyone. He walked ahead of me toward the exit. But I quickly noticed something interesting. He was deliberately slowing his pace. That gave me a dangerous idea. I decided to tease him. So I asked whether making him wait for me while walking was also one of my so-called rules. The moment he heard that, his entire body froze for a split second. I had clearly hit a nerve. Embarrassed and caught red-handed, he immediately picked up the pace. I watched his flustered back as he stormed ahead. And honestly, the whole thing was getting more hilarious by the second. But the moment I caught up with him, the mood changed. There was an unwelcome guest standing beside him. I knew that man. He had pursued me before, only to get rejected. And after learning that I was with him, he had even gone after him once. Whatever he had just said to him had clearly pushed both sides to the brink. The atmosphere was razor sharp. Neither man looked particularly happy. I quickly walked over. And I arrived just in time to hear that arrogant idiot pointing at him and running his mouth. He sneered that he was nothing more than a pretty-faced freeloader, someone who lived off his looks. According to him, sooner or later I would dump him anyway. But instead of getting angry, he didn't even bother taking the bait. He actually laughed. Then he looked the guy up and down. With that face of yours, you really couldn't make a living that way. Besides, my husband takes care of me. It was basically his way of saying, what does it matter to you who pays for my life? If he had a tail, it would have been sticking straight into the sky. The other guy was completely speechless. Then he turned his attention toward me. Seeing that his first attempt hadn't gotten under my husband's skin, he switched targets and tried to drive a wedge between us. He told me to investigate him properly before it was too late. Everyone supposedly knew that his family had become one of the city's biggest powers. They were already among the elite. In fact, they were even close to overtaking my own family. So I should be careful not to become someone's financial lifeline. He warned me that I might be raising an ungrateful parasite without even realizing it. My husband's expression became unreadable, but I could tell that something inside him had shifted. I stepped forward and wrapped an arm around him. Then I answered that man without giving him an inch. I support my own husband because I want to. What business is that of yours? For the first time, he completely lost control of his expression. He couldn't hide the smile tugging at his lips. I grabbed his hand and walked away. And for once, he followed me without putting up even the slightest resistance. We got into the car. He still seemed to be savoring the words I'd just used to defend him. I frowned. Then I turned to him with a dead serious expression. That guy was insulting me right to your face. And you just stood there and took it. He casually shrugged. Resting one hand against his head, he looked at me. His voice even carried a faintly spoiled, almost teasing tone. What was I supposed to do? He wasn't exactly wrong. I'm basically your little kept man. When we got married, he had transferred all his shares into my name. So, technically, the way things stood now, he really did look like a man living off his wealthy spouse. That finally clicked for me. Once we got home, I decided it was time to settle this little debt. I rolled up my sleeves. Then I poured myself a glass of ice water. His eyes followed me. No matter where I moved, his gaze quietly tracked every motion. I planted one hand firmly on the table. Then I started interrogating him. I demanded that he explained exactly when I had supposedly forced him to do all those things. When had I ever forced you to obey me? Without changing expression, he calmly started making things up. He claimed I'd apparently lost my mind before losing my memory. Apparently, I'd forgotten that I was still pretending to have amnesia. I froze. My brain immediately went into overdrive. And then I threw together the first excuse I could think of. Don't lie to me! I may have amnesia, but that doesn't mean I've lost my common sense. I told him I'd already asked Fang Yan. According to him, you were completely free. I never controlled your life in the first place. The ceiling light cast a sharp shadow across his face. His expression suddenly became much harder to read. I had no idea which part of my words had struck such a deep nerve. He slowly raised an eyebrow. And when he finally spoke, there was something almost possessive in his tone. Then why didn't you control me? For a moment, I genuinely had no idea how to respond. He stared directly into my face. Not a single change in my expression escaped him. He watched my confusion in silence. Eventually, he let out a quiet sigh. There was a hint of regret in his eyes. Then he simply said there was nothing to explain and fell silent. We remained locked in a wordless standoff. Eventually, I made my decision. I stepped toward him. And as I passed by him, he apparently assumed I was finally going to bed. So he stepped aside and politely gave me room to pass. But I stopped just a step away from him. Then I reached out, grabbed him around the waist, and lifted him clean off the ground. I forced him to tilt his head back until our eyes were level. The sudden move caught him completely off guard. A flicker of surprise flashed through his eyes. But that surprise was instantly replaced by unmistakable delight. And then came a level of excitement that was almost disturbingly intense. I looked straight at him and complained that I was the one getting the short end of the stick. Everyone seemed convinced I was some ruthless tyrant who forced him into everything. But I hadn't actually done anything. That wasn't fair. The moment he looked back at me, his dark eyes were suddenly overflowing with emotion. Way more emotion than I was prepared to handle. His tone rose slightly at the end, like he was almost daring me to continue. I lifted my hand and gently cupped his cheek. The cold touch of my palm made his entire body shudder. He swallowed hard. It looked like he'd been suppressing his emotions for far too long. His eyes were practically begging me to take the next step. I'd never done anything like this before. My heart started hammering like it was trying to escape my chest. I forced myself to stay calm and silently worked up my courage. Then I finally went for it. I leaned in and kissed him without any real technique or preparation. For him, it was like he'd finally received permission to stop holding himself back. His hands immediately slid around my waist, and before I knew it, he had completely taken control. My head was already spinning, leaving me lightheaded and barely able to think straight. But even then, I refused to lose my attitude and kept throwing sharp remarks at him. Now this is what you call forcing someone. He slowly licked his lips. And somehow, he even looked a little disappointed. A low laugh escaped his throat. It sounded almost like deliberate flirting. My cheeks kept getting hotter. Eventually, I cursed under my breath. This guy was absolutely impossible. I started suspecting that he was genuinely a little crazy. Unlike me, who is only pretending to be tough. I practically fled the scene. I'd spent 2 whole years running from him. And now, after finally working up the courage to face him, who knows whether I'd actually grown up emotionally. Then my friend reminded me that when she first heard I'd forced him into marriage, she thought I'd landed myself a juicy story. She apparently expected some dramatic romance worth gossiping about. Instead, according to her, the whole thing had somehow turned into a kindergarten field trip. After hearing about everything that happened that night, Fong Yoon immediately started bombarding me with messages. The excitement in those messages was absolutely off the charts. They sounded suspiciously like something she'd picked up from some online romance forum. And because of those messages, my imagination started spiraling completely out of control. Before long, my brain was already inventing scenarios I definitely should not have been imagining. I immediately shut that line of thought. I forced the conversation back toward the actual problem. I told her that something about him had been bothering me. There was something seriously off about the way he behaved. But somehow, Fang Yoon only became even more excited. She jokingly spun it into some ridiculous romance trope. Apparently, I was pretending to be the devoted lover while accidentally turning his fake illness into a real obsession. To her, the entire setup was peak drama, and she was absolutely eating it up. At that point, I realized there was no point trying to reason with her. Once she'd finished laughing, I decided to pretend nothing unusual had happened. But something still felt wrong. He kept finding excuses to hover around me. Sometimes, even in casual conversation, he would subtly push me to remember that night. And yet, every single time he managed to make my cheeks burn all over again. I got so irritated that I bought a stack of romance and medical books and started studying them one by one. I refused to believe I was hopeless. Surely enough, practice could eventually beat someone who simply had natural talent. After studying for several days, I was finally ready to show him what I'd learned. Unfortunately, he didn't give me the chance. He had to go on a business trip. Even if he was technically my kept man, he still had to go to work. While he was away, he complained to me about every little thing that happened. I occasionally answered with a sentence or two. And strangely enough, he never got annoyed. That only made me more suspicious. This wasn't right. It was nothing like the possessive, troublesome menace I knew. I kept racking my brain trying to figure it out. Then, all of a sudden, one memory resurfaced. It was sometime during our first month of marriage. One night, around 2 a.m, he stumbled home completely drunk. I was furious, so I picked a huge fight with him. And somewhere in the middle of that argument, he deliberately provoked me. He challenged me, asking whether I really wanted him under my watch every second of the day. Then he pushed the challenge even further. If I wanted total control over where he went and what he did, I might as well install surveillance cameras throughout the entire house. I'd never been able to tolerate challenges like that. The very next morning, I took his little challenge seriously. I had cameras installed in practically every corner of the house. No blind spots. None. But not long after installing them, I started regretting it. Our marriage had started under terrible circumstances, and I didn't want surveillance to make things even more twisted. So I tried my best to build a healthy relationship with him after we got married. That was why I never once actually opened the surveillance system. But remembering those cameras suddenly sent a chill down my spine. Because I realized one horrifying possibility. He had been doing all of this on purpose from the very beginning. I immediately opened the surveillance app. And what I saw made my blood run cold. One visitor had accessed the cameras tens of thousands of times over the past 2 years. And the most recent access had happened exactly 1 minute ago. I froze where I stood. The camera in the upper left corner suddenly felt like it was staring directly at me. I silently cursed every word I knew. Seriously? This guy could have won an Oscar. It was criminal that he wasn't competing for one. And that wasn't even the worst part. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted payback. Then I remembered the videos Fang Yoon had saved on her phone. I picked a few of the most provocative female livestream clips. Perfect. I deliberately aimed my phone directly toward the camera. Then I turned the volume all the way up. The first video wasn't even halfway finished when a call from him suddenly popped up on my screen. I pretended I hadn't noticed. I just kept scrolling like I was having the time of my life. He called again, and again, and again. Finally, I answered. What the hell are you doing? Even through the phone, I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. He sounded like he was 1 second away from completely losing it. So, naturally, I lied straight to his face. I just fell asleep. That excuse somehow made him laugh in pure disbelief. Fell asleep? And you were watching a female live stream while sleeping? Is that really what you're into? I pretended to be shocked and slowly looked around the room. Then I deliberately let my gaze land on the surveillance camera. Wait, you're monitoring me? His laugh came through the phone, low and right against my ear. That camera was installed so you could monitor me. I couldn't help rolling my eyes. Did he seriously think I was that stupid? Knowing myself, there is no way I'd actually been watching him all this time. On the other end of the call, his expression changed. He was smiling. But there was something almost sinister about that smile. Exactly. So, why didn't you watch? There it was again. The same question he'd been asking me all along. I tightened my grip around the phone and stared upward, almost as if I could stare straight through the camera and meet his eyes. He abruptly stopped reporting his whereabouts to me. It was obvious he was using that silence to make his displeasure clear. Our conversation ended badly that day. He threw one why after another at me, and I couldn't answer a single one properly. Eventually, he hung up. By evening, he posted several heartbreak songs on his social feed. Naturally, the gossip squad showed up in the comments. They joked that the young master had finally dumped him. Others asked whether his status as the official spouse had finally been threatened. Normally, he would have fired back at every single comment. But this time, he did something completely unexpected. He stayed silent. So, I liked his post. I've been keeping up this little performance long enough. It was time to finally close the net. That night, I went to a gathering. Everyone there were old friends I'd known since childhood. I asked Fang Yun to take a picture of me. She handed the phone back and jokingly said something that caught my attention. She said, I actually looked pretty good standing next to that childhood friend of mine. For a second, an old memory surfaced. That childhood friend and I had known each other for years. And in the picture, the angle made the space between us look almost non-existent. It looked like we were practically standing shoulder to shoulder. I hadn't even said anything yet, when my friend immediately started clarifying that there was absolutely nothing going on. What are you talking about? Don't make stuff up. She's been married for 2 years. And if her husband finds out, I'm absolutely dead. I twitched the corner of my mouth. Then I handed the phone back to Fang Yun. I asked her to do me a favor and post that picture on a public social feed where everyone could see it. I wanted the message to reach exactly one person, and judging by my friend's reaction, she nearly coughed up a lung on the spot. What did I ever do to you? I haven't even offended you. So why are you trying to ruin me? I gave him a sideways glance. Fine, I'll buy you the latest sports car. He immediately shut up. Fang Yun still looked a little unhappy about it. He was just about to complain again, but I predicted his move before he could speak. You like that watch, don't you? It's yours. It'll be delivered tomorrow. That shut him down for good, and he immediately posted the picture. I nodded in satisfaction. Then I waited several hours. After that, I deliberately asked Bai Lingbing to drive me home. He dropped me off right at the front door. I even invited him inside for a while. But Bai Lingbing immediately refused. Forget it. I might survive getting in, but there's no guarantee I'll survive getting back out. I could only laugh helplessly. The house was completely dark, but I knew he was already back. Faint moonlight spilled across the living room. Through the darkness, I could barely make out Someone sitting motionless on the couch. I switched on the lights. The sudden brightness made him squint in discomfort. He narrowed his eyes. Then he slowly looked up at me. And for the first time, I could clearly see his face. There was barbecue on the coffee table, along with the mask he'd been wearing earlier. I pretended nothing was wrong and walked over. Then I noticed his phone lying there with the entire screen shattered. And there were still fresh beads of blood seeping from his palm. "Why are you bleeding?" I grabbed the first aid kit and started treating his hand. And strangely enough, he cooperated without the slightest resistance. Inside that enormous house, the only sounds were our breathing and the steady pounding of our hearts. Once I finished bandaging him, I casually asked, "How did your phone get smashed?" He stared directly at me. His eyes were swirling with an overwhelming storm of emotion. But he didn't answer my question. Instead, he suddenly asked whether I'd finally gotten used to all this. My heart skipped a beat. But I kept my expression calm. He openly admitted it, then gave a cold little laugh. He picked up a piece of barbecue. Then he calmly exposed the truth. The social media post Fang Yun made had been arranged by me. My back immediately started sweating. Still, I forced myself to hold his gaze. Yes, it was deliberate. I finally forced out the last part of the confession. Yes, I deliberately had that girl drive me home. By then, my palms were soaked with sweat. I admitted it. We stared at each other for several long seconds. Then he suddenly started laughing under his breath. He laughed so hard his chest began to tremble. His eyes even turned slightly red. "Gu Chuan, you must be pretty pleased with yourself." I frowned. Pleased about what? The smile vanished from his face almost instantly. Then he started accusing me, one word at a time. "You think this is funny because I fell in love with you long ago? And you still kept pretending you didn't know. The thing I've been angry about for these past 2 years wasn't that you forced me to marry you. What hurt was that after we got married, you acted like none of it mattered when I heard you'd been in that car accident. My first thought was that if you died, I'd die too. Even as a ghost, I wouldn't let you go." His eyes had turned completely red. Tears were already gathering. He kept coming toward me, still holding the barbecue in one hand. I watched him approach without taking a single step back. "Shen Yuchu, I'm giving you one last chance to take that back." Choose your words carefully. He froze a short distance away from me. A tear slid down his cheek. He hesitated for several seconds. Then he finally raised one hand. He braced one side of the barbecue container against his waist. Then he extended the other hand toward me. His voice trembled as he begged me. "Gu Chuan, please don't abandon me after that miserable conversation." I spent a long time thinking. And finally, I understood what had happened on that night during our first month of marriage. I finally understood why Shen Yuchu had completely lost control. He must have seen me with Bai Lingbing. We've been having dinner together. So I went straight to Bai Lingbing and demanded the truth. He immediately started dumping the entire story on me. Don't even remind me. The very next day, for some ridiculous reason, I suddenly received a message from Shen Yuchu. A warning from Shen Yuchu. He said that if it weren't for the fact that I mattered to him, he seriously thought Shen Yuchu might have beaten him half to death. Once I connected every piece of the puzzle, I finally understood it. I finally figured out why the last 2 years had unfolded the way they did. Because I had forced Shen Yuchu into marrying me. I felt guilty toward him. I convinced myself that he didn't love me. So I deliberately restrained myself and kept my distance. But Shen Yuchu interpreted every bit of that distance as proof that I didn't care about him. Meanwhile, I was too stubborn to swallow my pride and comfort him. And he was too embarrassed to admit that he'd fallen in love with me. So misunderstanding piled upon misunderstanding, and our relationship took the longest, most twisted road possible. That kind of provocation had always worked on me, and apparently it worked just as well on Shin Yu-Chu. So I deliberately let him see that photo. I deliberately let him see Bai Ling Bing bringing me home. And as it turned out, the plan worked perfectly. Almost too perfectly, because now he had finally brought every buried emotion and every unanswered question straight to me. Tear stains still lingered across Shen Yu-Chu's face. The light in his eyes flickered between hope and fear. My chest tightened with guilt. Without saying a word, I reached out and wrapped my arms around his waist. His body trembled slightly. Then he buried his face against my chest. I asked whether there was really nothing else he wanted to ask me. Shen Yu-Chu didn't answer. Instead, he held me even tighter. Then, with everything he had, he slowly shook his head. I gently pulled myself out of his embrace. Then I looked at him with the most serious expression I'd worn all night. "But there's something I need to tell you." Shen Yu-Chu immediately looked nervous. He held onto my hand like it was the only thing keeping him steady. I looked him straight in the eyes, and this time, I made every word count. "I love you." Those were the words. I should have said when I first confessed and asked you to marry me. I should have said them from the very beginning. The shock and joy that exploded in Shen Yu-Chu's eyes were almost overwhelming. He started planting little kisses across my cheeks. And over, he whispered that he loved me. Then, his excitement completely got away from him. He couldn't stop holding onto my hands. He kept insisting that I repeat every word he told me to say. "Say, you fell for me because I'm good-looking." "I fell for you because you're good-looking." "Say, you forced your way into my life." "I forced my way into your life." "Now say, you love me." "I love you." He lifted his head and kissed the corner of my eye. And after finally getting everything he'd wanted to hear, he eventually fell asleep peacefully in my arms. The sun rose like it always did.